Alright, as promised, we're also going to look at the developer update for Freya today. So this is specifically focused on the Freya rework, and Ajax wrote this very long write-ups with a lot of detailed stats and everything to explain why and how Freya was changed the way she was, or how she was changed in the first place and why she's being changed back now. I'm gonna read through this and I'm gonna give my opinion wherever I feel like adding something to it. In the November SMITE update, we'll be doing something that has never been seen before in SMITE. We'll be reverting the design changes that reworked Freya's abilities. For those who aren't interested in reading a lengthy post, here's a summary. Freya's passive pulse and radiate abilities are being reverted to the functionality they had before the 5.13 rework. Balance numbers across her kit will be adjusted based on historical data for her most balanced states. The rework was unsuccessful for multiple reasons, which is clearly visible in both data and player feedback. At this moment, her play count and win rate are both the lowest in the game across all modes and skill levels. That's worth keeping in mind. The primary problem with the rework, as shown by data and player feedback, is that her skill variance did not decrease. Freya was a top pick and ban in Pro League throughout a series of potent nerfs. By the time she was balanced in SPL, the rest of the player base had long since stopped playing her due to the nerfs. We strongly feel that Freya was in a better position before the rework. Her stats were low but quite acceptable, and there was little to no community request to heavily change her. This will bring back some of her previous design concerns, but all around should be a massive improvement over her current status. We learned a lot from this process and do have ideas for how Freya could be changed in even more ways to make her healthier for the game, but we believe these strategies have more downside than upside. The most important downside will be if we continue to change Freya, she would no longer feel like Freya. We are aware that the revert coincides with the launch of a Freya skin. We hope that does not dominate the discussion. This change is being done purely for gameplay reasons because we feel we have failed Freya players by effectively removing her from the game. We wanted this to be remedied as soon as possible, and the HRX update was the soonest we could achieve it. On this note, by the way, the Freya skin is probably going to be one of the Ruby skins, probably the Y skin, so this was planned for quite a while as well. And apparently, according to Hyris, the design team, except for Hyris, didn't even know about, or the mechanics team basically didn't even know about the skin coming out. This update falls perfectly between production finishing on the Umoja and the full ramp up on the other new gods and Season 7, while also not being a part of the update that the World Championships would be played on. Our primary goal for this change is to bring back a character that had a dedicated audience. We don't expect these changes to adjust her power level or popularity by very much, but she could certainly be better than dead last. We hope that people who used to be Freya mains will be excited to hear that we are giving them back a character that they had loved and lost. We want to be as transparent, as flexible as possible as we receive feedback about this design choice to make sure we can arrive at something that we're all happy with. In update 5.13, July 24, 2018, Freya's passive, pulse, and radiate abilities were heavily changed with specific goals in mind. In this post, we'll go into detail about the goals of these changes, what happened afterward, what we learned, what our new goals are for her, and why we're doing this revert. Alright, let's get into the real deep dive on the issue. So far so good, I don't think I need to add that much here, but we'll get into those areas now, I think. Why did we do this in the first place? As mid-Season 5 approached, we took it upon ourselves to look for problems in the game and make large, meaningful changes to address those issues. We identified Freya as a potential candidate for gameplay improvements, which sounds ridiculous now after knowing what happened. Hindsight's 2020. In update 5.11, roughly the time we were working on mid-season, Freya's play count and win rate were clearly at the bottom of the pack. 94th in play count and 91st in win rate out of 96 gods. So second to last year. The year before 5.11 had been quite a roller coaster ride for Freya. She had two significant spikes in her win rate stats due to small buffs, followed by her metrics absolutely tanking after any adjustments to fix those spikes. These extreme highs and extreme lows usually identify core design problems, and her popularity never grew by very much, even when she dominated the meta. Both of those are usually clear signs that a rework is needed. We thought to ourselves, this goddess is a very well-known Norse figure. She has really cool and unique playstyle, and she's had an art update, which we know many people weren't too happy with. That's actually surprised me. I didn't know that people weren't happy with that art update, considering how bad she looked before, but oh well. But community discussions and things like cosplay and fan art have shown that people generally like her themes and visuals. So why was she so unpopular and underperforming? Clearly this goddess has potential to have better metrics than that. So what did we decide to do about it? We went about discussing the pros and cons of her kit, what we thought people liked or didn't like about it, and why her balance was so volatile. Very strong or very weak depending on slight chances. Our conclusion was that the Pulse plus Irradiate combo was the problem. That probably in hindsight was not the right conclusion, but again, hindsight's 2020. Her Banish and Ultimate abilities had clear applications, even though they had high frustration potential, but more on that later. However, Pulse and Radiate led to very high variance gameplay and included many unintuitive features. So in 5.13 we redesigned these abilities to be more consistent in their application and more clear in their synergy, with the goal of making Freya an obvious mage ADC. The patch notes are here, so this is basically the whole thing of the passive. Now restoring mana, I think that was part of the passive, as well as her having the one which can detonate and basically be used to clear better as well, and the two that can be activated and deactivated whenever you want, can be toggled in order to have ranged or close range or melee basic attacks. We can quickly look at that. I think I'm forgetting a part of the passive here. I think it's actually, the passive is actually that she healed herself. The mana restore is actually in the basic attack, I think. Let's check real quick. We can see that here. Yeah, no, it's actually just the mana. Yeah, oh, and the 2% maximum heal. There we go. Which was lifesteal beforehand. So that was changed around a little bit, which was fair enough at the time, but had a lot of implications. And you can also see there was some changes to Valkyrie's discretion here with the damage and the scaling. But yeah, that was just minor, really. For all reworks, we always try to preserve the god's core playstyle and unique mechanics. We learned long ago that community feedback will be overwhelmingly negative if we rework gods into something too different from the original gameplay goals. We felt that this rework reasonably met this goal, while also creating the possibility of Freya being easier to balance or gain more devoted players. How wrong we were. How did her PTS and launch go? Immediate community feedback was surprisingly neutral or missing entirely. The SMITE Reddit thread regarding this update show doesn't include much discussion about Freya at all, rather than becoming an assassin. The addition of the Mask Tree, Hades buffs, and Bakasura buffs were on top of the comments. There is one rather obscene Freya joke completely unrelated to a balance and rework. I feel like this might have something to do with a Cerberus thing. Was that even there yet? Well, it's in the Reddit discussion. We're not going to look into that. But yeah, that was then. This signaled to us that people weren't overly... No, the Cerberus thing was later. That people weren't overly excited about it. But in theory, the changes and messaging made sense and didn't spark backlash, which is a good thing for a rework. However, once we got to PTS, the issues quickly became apparent. Even though these PTS threads aren't covered in Freya discussion except in part 3, there were a lot of issues surfacing in other posts and other forms of social media. So also not gonna look at this. This is just the PTS threads with some more people complaining, I guess, and some people bringing it up. Even if the kit was theoretically moving in the right direction, we fell victim to the same problem Freya had before. The extremes of her kit were just too extreme. And this is probably referring to some of the clips as well, where she could basically one-shot if the enemy was in a minion wave. Pulse and Radiate did entirely too much damage in a short period of time, and inexperienced players were running out of mana too fast, effectively recreating the same problems we had before. Her interactions with items were confusing and potentially overpowered if you knew how to properly optimize it. So what about the post-rework metrics? I'll see if I can make those a little bigger. because you should be able to open them like this. Yeah, there we go. You can't see some of the numbers though. I will move myself and that problem is solved. So what you can see here is we have the Conquest ranked win rate in 5.12 and 5.13. So win rate goes from spot 87 to 31, 56 increase. So that's technically good, right? And the popularity also went up here by 17 spots to 54. Her ban rate, however, went from 72 to spot 1. That is probably not good. That's probably a bit too much. So she was highly popular, and she could have probably been more popular if she wasn't banned all the time. In normal Conquest, her win rate actually dropped. It was surprisingly high beforehand with 27 here, and it dropped to 34. Maybe not that many people were playing her there, I'm not sure. But yeah, that kind of is an indication here through the 74 in popularity. But then again, that's not so different from ranked. So the performance gap here is really, really surprising. And the popularity here went up way higher to spot number 3 because, of course, in Conquest, in casual Conquest, she can't be banned. And in non-Conquest, we see it going from 81 to 87. So actually, she got less wins overall, but she got a lot more popular, spot 31. So not a consistent picture here at all. And I think we'll see similar pictures to that later down the road in these threads, because she's just a god that just varies so much in performance. Back to the thread. Can I stay on the side? Yeah, I'll just keep my face on this side, because I think we have more images coming up. Data is shown as a rank among all gods. So win rate of A7 means she was 87th most winning god. Wait, is this most? I think this is just formulated. Oh yeah, no, it's the lowest, right? Okay, so 1 would be the best. 87th most winning god out of a total of 96 gods at the time. Bottom 10 in the game, losing a lot. The same is true for the popularity and ban rate. Yeah, okay, so 1 is best and the higher number is worse. In 5.12, both Telekine's Ring and Demonic Grip were buffed, causing Freya to have slightly better metrics than she usually did. She was not at her all-time low before the rework. Looking back, we now would be quite happy to have her at her 5.12 spots again. This was actually a spot in between her previous peaks and valleys in data. So this was all before the rework actually, and then the rework happened, if I get it right. I just have to check that back real quick. Yeah, 5.13 is when it happened, and oh no, is the rework. 5.12 is the stats before, where she was still doing okay. She wasn't doing horrible. She wasn't like dead last everywhere. And then that 5.13, this is after the changes. And 5.11 would be where her performance was significantly worse than 5.12 because of the item changes. I kind of wish they would have included that here just to show how she changed between that, but oh well. And we launched the rework, and the initial changes in core metrics didn't look bad. We saw a huge increase in popularity in all game modes, with an even bigger boost in Conquest. We also saw a win rate go down in unranked modes while skyrocketing in ranked Conquest. These were generally what we expected. Her peak performance seemed too high, but the rest looked okay. She still had a huge problem with her frustration and variance. The primary data point that we follow for this is the ban rate. She went through the roof. Another important data point is for these cases is pro play, pick and ban. And of course, this frustration is also visible in community feedback. Average players were still struggling with her, while veteran and pro players were making her look absolutely broken and overpowered. After her rework, Freya became the #1 most banned god in ranked Conquest. We saw that nearly 100% SPL pick and ban rate from 5.13 until 6.1, and a constant stream of negative community feedback about her feeling clunky to play or frustrating to play against. We had a solid balance plan for the scenario. Bring down her top end to balance for ranked and pro play while adjusting her visual effects to help new players better understand and fight against her. Went forward with this plan, but it didn't seem to help much. Even as she was nerfed repeatedly, ban rate, SPL pick, ban rate, and frustration all stayed high. Freya was nerfed 8 times over a 6-month period. I think in the Dev Inside they said 9 times even, with many of the problems persisting through the nerfs. Freya was nerfed in the following updates, not complete for each update, includes the main points of those. 5.14 decreased explode magical damage power scaling. 5.16 decreased explode base damage. 5.17 decreased explode magical power scaling. 5.19 decreased base movement speed. 5.21 decreased explode base damage. 5.22 decreased range bonus damage and scaling. 6.3 changed explode to deal much less damage over multiple shots using ammo. 6.4 decreased explode bonus damage, slow and minion damage. 6.8 decreased range bonus damage and increases scaling. Freya's stats are started to level out to a reasonable ban rate, pick rate, and ranked win rate around the time of 6.3 and 6.4 changes. 6.3 was one of the biggest changes that she got since the rework. This is the whole much less damage over multiple shots thing, which converted her explode damage into 5 smaller shots with an ammo count. We felt that this change would be a huge improvement to both the frustration as well as her top-end issues. With her stats and feedback setting, we thought we might have found the sweet spot for Freya finally. Even her pro stats had dipped down to a 54.35% and 57.14% pick and ban rate in the SPL during 6.3 and 6.4. After being nearly 100% ban rate in 6.2 and 6.1, this was reassuring. Her May 2019 stats right after the 6.5 launch looked almost acceptable. Her popularity and win rate had settled back into the spot in between her pre-rework spikes and dips close to 5.12. Her ban rate was low and reasonable, yet her win rate was lower than ever. The low win rate signaled to us that her player skill variance was still too high, seemingly higher than was pre-rework, which was a specific goal of ours to fix, so the opposite happened. This showed us that the change has failed. Just in case it wasn't clear enough to us that we hadn't solved her problems, the pros helped by giving us another reminder. They quickly figured out ways to build and position Freya even at that balanced state, causing her pick and ban rate to jump back to 98.15% in the SPL during 6.5, so almost every game. This was followed by the mid-season invitational, which highlighted the issue even more. At the mid-season invitational, Freya had the following stats: 100% pick and ban rate, 29 bans, 5 picks, 60% win rate. So even when she went through, she actually won. After this, we attempted to nerf her one more time, focusing on early poke damage that pros were heavily utilizing. I think this must have been around the time when Pythax became popular. Not 100% sure on that one. But imagine that maybe that was a little bit later. It could be. The 6.8 nerf was actually a shift, decreasing base damage and increasing scaling damage, but players still overwhelmingly perceived it as a nerf, and the stats did too. So, Freya's SPL pick and ban rate had finally dropped off. Unfortunately, so did every other measurable metric. The final result put Freya dead last in popularity and win rate in every mode and skill level. These stats are so much lower than all of her previous all-time lows. The additional nerfs to major ADC items for meta reasons didn't help that fact. She's still at those terribly low metrics today. You can see the final ascent after the 6.8 nerf. Let's look at those ones as well. So we have mid-season patch here. We have Queen of the Underworld, and then we have Corrupted Arena and Goddess of the Rivers, Emoja. So all the recent patches. So win rate, mid-season was at spot 20, and then she just became basically irrelevant, just bottom 10-ish all the time in Ranked Conquest. Her popularity went from spot 33 to 104 and then 105, so also bottom end. Her ban rate went from spot 13 to 30, then to 55, 78. So even when she wasn't even picked anymore and everything, she was still being banned by some people, but then she just disappeared. Conquest, a normal win rate, was at spot 57 before, so already not great, and then it's dropped down to the very bottom as well here, 103, 104, 99. Her popularity was spot 95, so not very popular at all anymore, and then it dropped down to 104, 105, 105, so non-existent. And in non-conquest games, no one was winning anything with her. It was just win rate 104, 103, 105, 105. I don't know why they didn't list the popularity here, but yeah, she was not doing too hot at all, or rather, she was the worst god in the game, apparently. And this is the data shown by rank out of 104 and 102 or 105 gods. Notice how, even before the nerf, she was doing terribly in all modes except Conquest. That nerf then sent Freya to the absolute bottom of the charts in Conquest as well. After watching the trend continue for 3 straight patches, we felt we needed the need to act quickly. No one has ever displayed metrics this low. Community has been asking for Freya changes for the last few updates in a row. All of the criteria are met for making a big change. This brings us to the reason why we're writing this report. How do we fix this? First, we had to evaluate how things went wrong. Mostly what I have covered in this post in the above sections. Community had no desire for a Freya rework. Guys generally need low stats and community requests for the rework to be successful. Our primary goal of decreasing her skill and balance variance was not met. This was shown clearly by her continued dominance of SPL, while all of her other stats tanked. It also became clear that we had adjusted the kit flow more than we should aim to for ability reworks. Freya felt considerably different to actually play than she used to. So we had a few options, each with their own sets of pros and cons. All of these options had the potential to dig Freya out of her all-time low stats that we are experiencing now. There are even more options than this, but this was some of the top contenders. Continue to balance the current version. Pros, there was some possible place in the stats where she had some hope. The plan would be partial revert of the big 6.8 nerf and some additional adjust for ADC item changes. This could put her in an okay place. Maybe. Cons. Players are absolutely exhausted with Freya balance. Very, very true. They would likely have little hope, excitement, or trust for a Freya buff, even though the community is keenly aware of how poorly she's performing right now. Doesn't change the fact that her new abilities for 1 and 2 are not meeting the desired goals. I gotta add here that I think not even everyone was aware of how poorly she was performing. If you don't look in the stats, you may not even know. If you're somebody who just doesn't like playing against Freya, and not somebody who's playing for Freya a lot yourself, then you may actually think that like she still shouldn't get buffs without looking at the stats. Just from the perspective of the history of Smite. Because Freya would always be at rock bottom and then she gets a buff and she's insanely strong again. And most people that don't enjoy playing Freya do not enjoy playing against Freya in her strong state because she is very frustrating to deal with quite often. So I think this would have led to a lot of trouble overall, and I'm very glad they didn't go this route. Push further into the rework. Pros, we could end up with a really exciting and fun guard that feels balanced and interesting. Cons, this would require a large rework. The plan would be change ability 1 or 2 entirely, rework the passive again, add much better pre-fire and counterplay mechanics to banish and her ultimate. They get to that again I think later, but this is apparently still a possible plan. This goddess would cease to feel like Freya. In order to achieve this, Freya would be losing many of her defining features. Double stim, banish CC effect, high risk, high reward playstyle. I think the high risk, high reward playstyle is kind of what leads to her whole heavy up and down and unstable performance as well. Revert the passive, pulse and irradiate. Pros, veteran Freya fans would be very pleased, as would any long-term Smite players who often request reverts of reward characters and strongly appreciate when we are honest about our mistakes and take action to remedy them. Freya would definitely still feel like Freya. Players would possibly be surprised and relieved to see this change instead of bored and negative about it. Correct so far. Cons, Freya will have the same problem she had before the rework. We have never done something like this and players might backlash harder than ever before. I sincerely hope that doesn't happen because I personally think it's good that they did this. Like I think most people liked old Freya better even after everything that you had to go through with old Freya throughout the seasons. I think she was still in a more healthy place, and I still think now there is more room for adjustment in a good way. Like, sure, you can question why the changes were made in the first place when the community didn't really ask for them that much, but I'm glad, like, I'm always glad when people admit a mistake. That's all it is. And if they say this was a mistake, and I wish they would have done that with changes in the past, because Hi-Riz has a history of more being likely to double down on a mistake and be like, nah, we work it out differently, than actually going back on it. So please, unless you're like absolutely against it, of course, then it's your opinion, but don't give them unwarranted backlash for this, and encourage this if you think it was a good change, because that would mean that in the future we can potentially get similar changes again. If something fails, then Hi-Rez might be more willing to go back on it and say, okay, we just revert this one, it just didn't work, and it's okay, we can just admit that it didn't work and it was not a good idea, and that's fine. But if everyone is going to give them heavy backlash, then of course that's not the case, and they will not do that again. Player perception, especially among our veteran players, is of the utmost importance to the design team. All new guards and balance decisions throughout Season 5 and 6 have been focused towards this change. The results have been overwhelmingly positive. New guard launches and balance patches have been more positively received by players than any time in SMITE history. This Freya decision was made with this concept in the forefront of the discussion. When discussing which direction to take Freya, we always ask ourselves what change will get the largest number of our players excited. The Revert met this goal more than any of the other options. Option 1 didn't feel honest and transparent to us. We know the community really appreciates the truth, and we couldn't continue to tell them that the current design was an improvement. Historically, SMITE players hate when we change guards into something completely different. Regardless of how unbalanced or unpopular it may be, we always try to keep the character's core design. This ruled out option number 2, and this is something they want to consistently stick with now as well. The Revert seems like the best option, although far from a perfect one. The plan and the data. We will return her passive pulse irradiate to the previous states. Revert all her balanced numbers to earlier ones in her career. The next chart shows Freya's entire history across all game modes and skill levels. Data starts at the end of 2012. And we'll look at this first before we read this out, because that doesn't make sense the other way around. Okay, so blue line is her match count shown as a percent of total matches. So this is her match count, or rather match count would in this case mean her pick rate, percentage wise. So this is around 4.4% of all picks right here, and then here it's like 0.4%, yeah, 0.2%. The yellow one here is the win rate. So we can see her win rate actually started pretty low. It started around 0.4. No, oh wait, it's measured on this side. Oh, it's still slightly below 50%. It's like 48%-ish. And then you can see it kind of going up to 50. It doesn't ever reach 55. So she stays relatively average on most of this, but then here we can really see it drop down at the end, down to less than 40% win rate, to like 38-ish. And then the last one is the ban count. And we can see that the ban count really fluctuates depending on when she's perceived strong. So here you can see, for example, she was actually strong for a while. And this is the point where people realized around late 2016 that Freya's strong, and suddenly her ban rate goes up heavily. She gets changes, or people learn to play against it depending, and it goes down. And we see this happening over and over. So the slightest change, the slightest tweak, the slightest buffs to Freya that boosted her performance a little bit always led to very heavy ban spikes, which is very interesting. Whereas her pick rate overall just went down no matter what. Let's see what Hi-Rez has to say about that outside of this. Wait, I had to check. Did I check that? No, it just doesn't really explain. It's just the ban rate here in numbers. The ban rate is 0.14 at the highest, and then 0 at the bottom. So 14% ban rate. Blue line is a match count shown as a percent of total matches. This makes it immune to changes in total player count because it's percentage. It's expected for guards to gradually drop down as more new guards are introduced, and also as we have more guards especially. Notice the times when Freya rose and fell in popularity. It corresponds closely with certain patches as well as changes in win and ban rate. We can see that here, that the popularity here goes up, here it goes up, here it goes up, here it goes up. It's always a little spike, right? Even though, again, it still goes down, but that's also because of the higher player number. Though I'd still think that, you just have people, like, you have less people maining her as well when there's a larger pool of gods. Anyway, kind of says the same thing anyways. Orange is the win rate. This is shown without any adjustments for player skill or population shift. Her highest win rate ever was 52%, lowest before the rework was 46%, and now after the rework currently it's at 38%. Green is the ban rate. This is also shown as a percentage of total bans. Notice the relative differences between her spikes. Even when she was powerful in the past, she was never banned more than she was after the rework. This is specifically looking towards the end here. We really see she's just consistently a high ban pick, even when her performance doesn't match that anymore. Whereas in the past, she was never really a high ban pick, even when she was good. All right, you can see an area in August 2016 where she was visually updated. Her popularity initially spiked and then dropped. This is the August 2016. This is here. See this area right here. I'm actually gonna move this over here real quick, and then I can read that on the side, and we can keep the graphic open. Afterward, from November around here, 2016 to February 2017. So in this area, her ban rate went way up and win rate went way down. Yeah, we see that here. Although her ban rate rose here, it was never as high as the more recent spikes. Her first huge spike was in August 2017. That's here. After a base attack speed and pulse damage buff. The attack speed was immediately reverted and the pulse damage halfway reverted in the next patch. So that's why it's gone down again. She would receive no other changes until 5.3, which is in February 2018. So this is here where the next spike occurred. 5.3 was actually significant nerfs to her. So she spiked due to the meta shifts or item changes. Likely the 5.1 changes and the to the meta caused this. Notice how extremely intense spikes were, how extremely intense these spikes were, but they still don't reach the intensity of a rework ban rate. It's important for us to understand what caused the previous rise and fall in order to launch this Freya Revert successfully. Based on the data, we will aim for February 2017 balance point. So that was around here, where she actually, was still banned a little bit, and overall solid, really. This was a medium popularity, close to 50% win rate, and lowest ban rate. That doesn't quite add up here, unless it drops. No. Not sure how is the lowest ban rate, but I guess. We aim to launch her in the state with the hope that she will feel slightly undertuned in the current meta and item builds. We certainly do not want to have to do a series of balance changes after this launch due to players already being quite sick of Freya balance. True. Okay, we go back over here. And hopefully this revert will do the following. Yield positive community feedback through honesty, transparency, and writing a mistake. Gets a thumbs up from me at least. Yield positive community feedback by returning a reworked god to their classic state, something often requested for Freya. Place Freya in a niche popular match count stats, meaning some place at the bottom 40, but not in the bottom 10 gods. Fair enough. Place Freya in a high skill balanced win rate stats, meaning under 50%, but still feeling potent in the hands of a player who has significant time played with Freya. So, you have to be playing Freya a lot and be good at her to really perform with her. And I think that's also fair. And I think that's the most fun way to play against the Freya as well. What else did we learn? To restate Freya's unique features and why they are hard to work with. Freya is unlike any other gods in Smite. She is a mage that can flex between assassin or hunter. Well, not really. She's always a hunter. She can jungle, yeah, but I wouldn't call her an assassin ever. This flex potential makes her design inherently hard to adjust. Focusing in one direction could cause a lot of disappointment. She has Banish, a rare form of crowd control, which only appears on Freya, Janus, Kumbhakana, and Naja. This type of CC is very high variance. Freya's Banish does no damage, so it must be followed up in order to be effective. It can also save enemies from allies' attacks. She has 2 stims with interlocking synergy, something that no other god has. This causes a multiplicative effect that leads to her being very effective and then doing literally nothing. That will be the case again now. Keep this in mind. After this arc of work, we changed our opinion on what causes problems with our kid. If we had to make changes to Freya after the reword, we do have a plan. And they state on the patron store that they won't necessarily do that. Her passive, Pulse and Irradiate, would be numbers focused, possibly with additional improvements to visual or audio clarity on her effects. They would be adjusted through balance only, never reworked again. Banish would need significant changes. It has a lot of problems that need solving. It's essentially undodgeable at a pre-fire time or a deploy time of the Banish. It can save enemies from allies' attacks, let enemies be hit during it but drastically decrease the duration. This would make it feel, and that means that Freya also has an issue like getting close to an enemy when her 2 is down and just mailing them when using Banish. This would make it feel like a normal skill shot stun. Add unique elements for flavor and feel to make it unique. Let enemies hit by it hover lightly off the ground and still have some control over their movement, although greatly slowed. That's actually interesting. So you kind of like floating around a little bit. It could at least look funny. I don't know why they do that with the animations for each specific god. Her ultimate would also need significant changes. This ability feels rather lackluster to many new players, when in reality it provides an absolutely insanely powerful combination of easy to confirm damage, mobility, and immunity frames. This ability should most likely have the normal channel time that a global ult has, where Freya should be rooted and vulnerable before leaving the ground. So kind of a wind up like Jingwei, for example. Each individual shot would be easier to dodge with better warning deployables or slower projectile time. Slower projectile. I feel like that would be rough on Freya's ultimate. I think that would make it relatively easy to dodge. Find another utility feature to make it interesting and unique, since its mobility and damage potential would be decreased. And there's also the question of the duration and everything. It still would be one of those more hard to balance abilities either way. We hope we never have to do those things, but we might as well be clear about documenting and communicating them, since we spend so much time working on this goddess. And based on all this, we also have some stuff about other gods. But so far, I want to conclude that part that I think it was a very good decision. And yeah, I think that this rework, let me know in the comments how you guys feel about it, but I think this rework was the right choice. Even though I don't necessarily think that her old 1 and 2 were the greatest version that could be, I think they're still better than the mess that came from them with the rework. I would still wish that they could like rework one of them individually, but I can see why they don't want to touch them anymore and just balance her in other ways. All right, other gods. This might bring up some questions about other gods and our decisions about resource allocation, so let's discuss the possibilities and trade-offs. First, let's describe our criteria and constraints for a god rework. We'll not rework a god's abilities unless all 4 of them are the following are met. Oh, we had this already. I'm actually going to skip over this one, I think. I'm going to look over it real quick, but I've already discussed that in my other video today, where they talked about those things in the dev inside. We're just briefly going to glance over them. So the popularity is significantly lower. Balance problems, yes, we have had that. Community discussion. And there we have all of that. And then once we identify this, we keep the following constraints in mind. We also discussed that already. Yeah, we've discussed all that. Just check out my my dev inside video itself. This one is interesting. A common concern from players about something like this is this work is taking away resources from a god who needs it more. We hope the data and feedback shared in this write-up prove that Freya needed this badly. We can confirm that Odin Bastet reworks are top priority for Season 7. The Freya Revert did not affect this timeline. Odin and Bastet are currently planned with reworks for 7.1 by meeting the above criteria, and their design changes will follow the above constraints. Odin's goal will be to preserve his core gameplay style, an aggressive high damage warrior with an ultimate that blocks player movement, improve his ability to fight over long periods of time, and add more flavor to his kit through runic magic and the use of his spear. Bastet's goal will be to preserve her core play style as an early game high DPS assassin that can dive in and out of fights, add utility to her. Oh, they actually mentioned out of fights here, but didn't mention that in the patch notes show. So that's good. She can still have an in and out move. Add utility to her kit to help her better scale into the late game and focus on using her cats in more interesting ways than normal pets. It's possible that one of these reworks does not ship in 7.1. Depending on how design iteration goes, we might delay or hold one, but we are starting to work on them. And then we have Ratatoskr as well. Another discussion likely to arise from this request towards other gods who were reworked. Some of those were quite successful, some were not. We can share our thoughts on these gods too. Ratatosk's goals were mostly justified at the time of release, but we are considering a partial revert for the rat. We have current designs in progress to return to his acorns. Each acorn would provide a new twist to each of his current abilities, but these effects would be a bit more tame than the frustrating, confusing, and poorly balanced old ones for Ratatoskr. Oh, that's a roast that... was it Dry Bear who made it? Ouch. This most likely launch later in Season 7, depending on the scope and the success of internal tests. Nox is also a common point of discussion when it comes to classic gods. Current Nox can be frustrating and difficult to play, but she's actually quite popular. Okay, I've talked about Nox already as well. We can kind of skip over this because the other ones that will come up here are Arachne and Nua. Yeah, we can skip that. They are just not being reworked because they're kind of working well. And then we have the closing statement here. The Freya Rework will be a very unique situation that we will all be able to learn from. Even though this post is a lengthy read, we wish we could go into the data even more closely. Do it next time. Maybe we will on some sort of follow-up discussion. Please share your thoughts about this decision on social media and make sure to keep the discussion going. Remember that our #1 goal always is to make our players happy. Thanks for reading. Oh, and I thank you guys for watching. Now, I think this was good. I think I like that they're looking at other gods as well, and that they, coming back to these points that are brought up often, like for example the Ratatoskr acorns coming back, but then also considering how can that actually be done, and is that a possibility? Because I do not actually want the old acorns back. As much as it was fun, it was only fun when you're playing it yourself. So I think overall very good choices here, and I hope that the Freya rework will feel decent, though I'm expecting further changes to come because the item situation is just completely different from back then. So that's going to have a massive impact for her, and we'll see how that works out. And I think we'll see changes to the Banish and the Old later down the road. And I kind of hope we do, because I don't really like these abilities in their current state all that much. So I don't want her to end up feeling like rusty and kind of old and not up to date with how the game is designed now, just because they don't want to touch her anymore. Because most other characters have gotten some sort of warning for their CC basically, so that you can anticipate it, that you can react to it, and there's counterplay, but then also sometimes it's a little bit more rewarding. And I think that's good. I think that's healthy for the game and makes it more fun, especially for new players as well. And God knows, we need every way we can to get new players into the game. Of course, even in hindsight, it's questionable how this whole change went through in the first place when it wasn't asked for and her stats were actually going up around the time. But I can also see how you're already in the process of something and you don't want to scrap it all after spending time on it. What's it called? Sunk cost. Is it a fallacy? No, it's not a fallacy, but you know what I mean. So yeah, with that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't checked it out, you can also check out the other video where I go a bit more in depth on the dev inside itself. And other than that, I will see you for the next one tomorrow. It's maybe going to be 2 videos. We'll see. One would not be Smite. One would be this really cool new game, of which I forgot the name right now, but I will remember tomorrow. Until then, thank you guys very much for watching. And yeah, let me know how you feel about these changes in the comments down below. If you're new to the channel, feel free to use the sub button and ring the bell. It helps me out. DukeSloth, out.